Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Bible story reading. It's kind of a snowy, yucky day out. It's cold, and I'm having to motivate myself today to get anything accomplished. But one thing I am excited about today, despite the cold weather, is getting to read to you the next portion of this story that we have been in. For those of you joining for the first time, let me tell you what we do here. First off, welcome. We go through the different stories of the Bible. For people who don't know what the stories are, maybe you've only heard bits and pieces of them. Maybe you think you know what they are, but you've never actually heard all of them. So we go through them in their entirety and give you an opportunity to hear for yourself what they say. That way, if it comes up in conversation, you're able to participate in that conversation. And hopefully you remember these stories. We have been going through the story of David, who becomes king. He's the second king of Israel after Saul. Saul's family is all dying off. There's been this war basically between the house of Saul. Saul has died. His son Jonathan, who was David's best friend, has also died. And there's been this war going on between the house of Saul and the house of David, the two kingships. And David is winning at this point. When Saul and his son Jonathan were killed in one of the battles, this messenger came to David and said, "Guess what? Saul's dead." And he brought him this news thinking, and he told David that he was the one who helped Saul die. He was thinking that he would probably win favor with David because he killed off David's enemy. But instead, David was very upset. He said, "How could you dare lift your hand against God's anointed?" And so he had that servant put to death. Meanwhile, Saul's other son, Ishbosheth, has been reigning king for the house of Saul. And we're going to start now with 2 Samuel chapter 4. When Saul's son Ishbosheth heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he gave up, and all Israel was dismayed. Saul's son had two men who were leaders of raiding parties, one named Baanah and the other Rechab, sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite of the Benjaminites. Beeroth is also considered part of Benjamin, and the Beerothites fled to Gittaim and still reside there as aliens this day. Saul's son Jonathan had a son whose feet were crippled. He was 5 years old when the report about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nanny picked him up and fled, but as she was hurrying to flee, he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. Rechab and Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, set out and arrived at Ishbosheth's house during the heat of the day when the king was taking his midday nap. They entered the interior of the house as if to get wheat and stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and his brother Baanah escaped. They had entered the house while Ishbosheth was lying on his bed in his bedroom and stabbed and killed him. They removed his head, took it, and traveled by way of the Arabah that all night. They brought Ishbosheth's head to David at Hebron and said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, your enemy, who intended to take your life. Today the Lord has granted vengeance to my lord the king against Saul and his offspring." But David answered Rechab and his brother Baanah, sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, "As the Lord lives, the one who has redeemed my life from every distress. When the person told me, 'Look, Saul is dead,' he thought he was a bearer of good news, but I seized him and put him to death at Ziklag. That was my reward to him for his news. How much more when wicked men kill a righteous man in his own house, on his own bed? So now, should I not require his blood from you and purge you from this earth?" So David gave orders to the young men, and they killed Rechab and Baanah. They cut off their heads and feet and hung their bodies by the pool in Hebron. But they took Ishbosheth's head and buried it in Abner's tomb in Hebron. What a gruesome story. Isn't that something? Well, there are three ways that we look at these stories when we read them. What does it say? We have to read the words on the page and have reading comprehension. What was it saying to the people of the time? What was the history, the culture? We have to take everything into context. We have to understand what's going on in the story. And last, what, if anything, is this saying to us today? Well, let's point out, first off, the consistency of David's recognition that God is the one that fights his battles, that God is the one that protects him, that God is the one who has saved him from things. He says, vengeance belongs to God, not me. It's not up to me to put my hand against people and just murder them in cold blood. Not to say that David hadn't killed people. He had killed plenty of people, but he killed them in battle. He killed them during times of war. He didn't go into somebody's house and innocently, kill somebody just laying on their bed. And he had understood that Saul had been anointed at one point by God, and that it was up to God to determine when these people's lives would come to an end. And so it was a righteous person that he says here that had given him the news of Saul's death, and he still had him put to death. And now he's saying, but you wicked men, how much more am I going to do to you? So he not only has them put to death, but he shames them by having their heads and their feet cut off. But he takes the head of Ishbosheth, who was the king that had just kind of given up. He recognized that he was losing the kingdom, that he just wasn't the leader anymore, that God had not anointed him. And so Ishbosheth had basically just given up. And even so, David respected him, and he took his head that these men had cut off, and he had it buried and respected with Abner. Remember, in the previous chapter, Abner had been killed by Joab. So, this is quite an action-packed story, full of adventure and horror and things that maybe we just don't understand. We don't understand how some things are done in culture. But again, what we are being taught through this, through how David responded to his enemies, is that God teaches us that we are to respond to our enemies, sometimes by not responding, by letting God fight our battles for us, by doing what is right, because God is in control. We're not in control. We don't have to fight against our enemies. We can let God do that for us. The outcome of those things is up to God. We also learn that those who commit atrocities like this will be punished. And David makes that very clear. Well, I hope you're learning something about these stories. I would like to get some more feedback. I had a little bit of feedback yesterday regarding doing some extensive type Bible story studies where you have an opportunity to maybe do an independent study where you can get some material and go through the stories and stuff on your own. Or I'd like to see if we get enough people interested in doing some type of a Zoom classroom setting where we have interaction with one another so you can ask questions. And I certainly don't know everything. There are things that I learn as I do these stories myself. Some things I just don't know, and I'm still learning. But we would have an opportunity to go through these stories together. You can decide what stories you would like to learn, and we do that more in a classroom type setting so we can all interact with one another. If that's something you're interested in, just send me a message or leave a remark, and I'll start working on those things if we have enough interest. In the meantime, I hope you got something out of today's reading, and I hope you learned something. I look forward to us getting back together the next time. Have a great day. God bless.